Hello. Just for the record, I am former Minister of Information. So in reality, I didn't really get enough time to celebrate this achievement. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. As you know, Yemen is sort of a war-torn country, and it's been like that for 3 years now, unfortunately. And it is a poor country. It's actually the least developing country in the Middle East. And it's almost 26 million people. The indicators for women's illiteracy are very scary. 1 in 2 women cannot read and write. Healthcare services, such as reproductive healthcare, can reach only 1/3 of the women of my country. And in the same time, the political indicators of Yemeni women are much higher than the region. And this is sort of a puzzle that I'm currently researching as a PhD student. So from minister to student. And hopefully, let's see what happens next. But before that, I was a journalist. I've been a journalist. I was an editor of the Yemen Times, which is an English language newspaper in Yemen. It was founded by my father, who was assassinated in 1999 by the same regime that I tried to work against in 2011. And then in 2014, I was kicked out of the country by the same regime who killed my father because it came back to power through a rebellion. So sort of it's an irony of how much you think you've achieved as a woman in a developing country, and then to realize that nothing really has changed because the culture has not really changed. And I want to tell you a bit about access to information from a gender perspective, and I want to tell you specifically about the story of Yemeni women. Now, research in general says that if you have access to information, it is likely to empower women. Like, research says that in general, for women, for example, in India, rural women with access to information technology, they are becoming more economically independent. Research also talks about political activism. For example, Iranian women, it was said that in the 2006 elections, they were the first bloggers, the first people to access the internet for political reasons. So women want to be part of the internet technology. They want to be part of the global phenomena of access to information and using it for their own good. But what really happens? So in Yemen in 2011, you all know about the Arab Spring. And I'm not sure if you've seen it, but there were masses and masses of women there in the street protesting. And they were using Facebook, they were using Twitter, they were using WhatsApp, and all of the other sort of new media and social media to get around, to organize themselves alongside men. And I remember a story because at the time I was a journalist. I was the editor of the Yemen Times, and internet was considered something taboo for girls in many rural areas and in many even urban families that were a bit traditional. And so they thought the internet is going to make their daughters bad, basically, that the understanding that internet is a foreign invasion and that it's going to demoralize their daughters. It was okay for the sons to go online, do whatever they do, but not for the daughters. But in 2011, I remember the story of a girl whose father told her, please go ask Facebook if the streets will be blocked tomorrow because there will be a protest or not. So the father thought that Facebook was a person and that she would communicate with Facebook through the internet and understand what's happening in their neighborhood. So it was kind of an eye-opener for me that, yes, societies do change, and maybe internet technology will allow women to become more politically active. But come to think about it now, as a researcher, I realized that access to information alone is not really the answer. It is part of the answer, but it's not the answer, because if you have access to information, but the rest of the society is still considering women as inferior to men, then this wealth of information may not be able to be transformed into something that empowers women in general. It is a starting point, but it is not the only answer. And like has been said before, information alone without human rights is not the answer. So I'm adding a third bit to our blocks that we're building today: access to information, protection of human rights, and gender equality in the social culture. So I'm talking about the social bargaining powers of women and men, the power balances in the society. If this does not, well, it is part of human rights, if you consider that equal citizenship, for example, is between men and women. But the problem with gender is that it's often forgotten when we talk about human rights. As a journalist myself, I often forget when I'm talking about detainees, freedom of expression, the issue of women slips off my head sometimes, even as a woman myself. So I think gender has to be given a specific pillar of its own in addition to human rights. It is a part of human rights, but no, we have to emphasize gender equality and women's access as a woman. And then what do we do with this access? In 2014, I was Minister of Information. And this is a big job. It's actually, I was in charge of over 5,000 employees. I was in charge of 16 media, radio stations, 5 dailies, 3 national TVs, and the TV corporation. So it was really a gigantic mission. And all of that was stripped away from me when the coup d'etat took place. The rebellion went to the different institutions, and they literally took over by guns and Kalashnikovs. So I remember the day the coup d'etat took place in September 2014. And I knew about what was happening because I had access to information before it took place as a Minister of Information. And I called the TV station and I said, breaking news, people need to know that their capital is being taken. And the people in my TV station, in the national TV station, had that line for just a few minutes, and then it was removed. And when I called back to find out what's going on, they said, the rebels are here with their guns. So imagine how the whole authority was stripped away from me, and I could not present the information that I had to the public. I went to Twitter. I actually took my personal Twitter account and I used it to convey information. This is what's happening now. The presidential palace is surrounded. The prime minister has been locked up. There's an attempted assassination here. Don't go to the streets. There's gunfire and all of that. And I kept doing that in Twitter. And Twitter called up information from all over. So media came, and CNN, the BBC, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, everybody was calling me, and I was telling them what was going on in the country. And I realized how privileged I am to have access to this social media platform. First, how smart I was that I went to Twitter and did not stop. But then that this was a tool, and if I didn't have that tool, so much in history would have changed. Like, for my country's history, it was a milestone. And then I realized if I didn't do that at that point, I would be losing out. And then Twitter rewarded me by the thousands and thousands of followers. So in one day, from 5,000 followers, I had 20,000 followers. Now I have 60,000 followers. But that's beyond the point. The point is, if you have access to a certain tool, then you should use it. And so it was first that I had the information with me. Second, I had the tool to disseminate this information, and that this tool was interactive. And third, people had access to this same tool that I was disseminating information through. So it's sort of a whole cycle. If I only had the information and I couldn't disseminate it, that was one thing. If I had the information and disseminated it through the platform, but nobody was able to access it, that would be another thing. And then to have the third aspect of it is that information was following through. Now, today in Yemen, there is censorship. There is censorship over the internet. There is censorship over the newspapers, the media, everything. And the situation of women is much worse. Unfortunately, women are the first to be thrown out of the window whenever there's instability. Nobody is talking about women. And without having women as part of the peace-building process, I think whatever peace we're trying to make in my country is not going to be sustainable. That's it. Thank you.